and welcome to a special episode of Dairy Digressions, the new podcast of the American Dairy Science Association, the Journal of Dairy Science, and JDS Communications. I'm Matt Lucy, Editor-in-Chief of JDS Communications, and I'll be your host. And today, for the first time, I am joined by guest co-host Kimmy Delvaney from Progressive Dairy Podcast and Progressive Dairy Magazine. And let me tell you, this was my idea, and I'm so stoked to doing this with you, Kimmy. And Kimmy, I'm a huge fan of your podcast. I'll stop right there. But anyways, all right. So, but aside from leading Progressive Dairy Podcast, Kimmy covers business management, dairy policy, mental health, farm safety, cow comfort, and other hot topics for PD. Of course, she writes lots and interviews many people there. She grew up on her grandparents' farm in Washington State. I see you're a Washington State grad.
I am.
Yeah, yeah. And so she's wearing her Washington State stuff. Grew up, Daryl, in the foothills of Mount Rainier.
Yes, very beautiful.
Beautiful area of upstate in Washington. Lots of cows there as well, of course. We're not going to talk about cows in Washington, but there's cows in Washington State. You know, that's the other side of the country. Okay, you got to keep driving. You know, past Buffalo,
the Columbia Valley, and I've been in the Yakima Valley also.
Oh,
lots of cows there.
Lots of cows. You know, so. But I was just so stoked, and of course, you know, dairy is an old friend of the American Dairy. Kimmy's an old friend of the American Dairy Science Association, and past president of the Student Affiliate Division of American Dairy Science. So welcome, Kimmy. Thank you for accepting our invitation to be here.
Yes, thank you, Matt. And yeah, 2007 was my first ADSA meeting and became SAD president in 2009. So I've been involved in ADSA for a while, and it's great to be here today.
It's fantastic to have you. And together we are coming to you from the ADSA Discover Conference number 45 on dairy cattle lifespan taking place at the Englewood Resort in Itasca, Illinois. ADSA Discover Conferences bring together the top minds in the dairy industry for these special episodes. I will be sitting down with the experts who are attending the meeting to get their thoughts on exciting new developments for dairy. If you enjoy Dairy Digressions and Progressive Dairy Podcast, make sure to like and subscribe. Is that what we're supposed to do, Kimmy?
That's right.
That's right. Yeah. Both. We could two together, okay?
Yeah, wherever you listen to podcasts.
We're on all your favorite platforms.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay, for sure. So make sure to like, subscribe, rate us, and tell a friend or colleague about. But everybody knows about Progressive Dairy Podcast, so you know about that. Tell them about Dairy Digressions Podcast. So today we have Dr. Daryl Nydam from Cornell Veterinary Medicine, professor in the College of Veterinary Medicine. Is that fair to say?
Yep.
And we're going to talk all about all the hats you wear, but we want to just first of all sort of explore a little bit about Daryl. Growing up in Stamford, New York, that's your birthplace. I know that I looked that up. It is on Google Maps. You can get there. Okay, you can get there, correct? How in the world did you get interested in dairy?
Well, I'm a second generation Dutch kid.
Yeah.
My grandfather came through Ellis Island and set up a little dairy farm. And my father was the oldest of 10 kids, and he saw the veterinarian back then driving around in a car listening to the radio and thought that might be a pretty good life. So my father became a dairy vet. So his clinic was attached to my boyhood home. So Christmas was get into your stockings. Dad goes on a calving case or a milk fever, and then we come back to open the rest of presents, or similar for Thanksgiving holidays and whatnot. So that's how I became aware of dairy production.
So dairy was kind of in your blood at a very early age. And of course, you're Dutch. So your family, are there other Dutch Nydam dairymen in the area? Or was it just your grandfather who set up the dairy?
Yep. My grandfather set up the dairy, and I carry a little picture around of this small barn that supported all 10 of those kids.
Yeah. And so it's fascinating. So you interviewed somebody from Cowboy Dairy up in Idaho, or somebody.
One of my co-hosts did. Yes.
And it was the same thing. Dutch guy comes in with 40 cows in Texas, right? And all of a sudden moves and is in Idaho with, I don't know how many, Dutch Cowboy Dairy, right? Is that the name of the dairy?
Utah, actually. That was Gen Point. But they have they've grown their herd quite a bit.
And so what is it about Dutch people, 40 cows, and ending up with a 5,000, 10,000 cow dairy? What is that?
I will say, my grandfather didn't end up with 5,000 cows.
Right.
He actually died early in my dad's life. So that whole family subsequently supported each other through college, and my dad became a dairy veterinarian.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So went a little different direction with that.
Yeah.
So I noticed that you went to, of course, you obviously, you have your DVM from Cornell. Before you went that, you were at Geneseo, which is the State University of New York at Geneseo, majoring in biochemistry. So was the plan, okay, did you want to be a biochemist or a veterinarian when you went to Geneseo?
I wanted to play basketball.
Okay. So
yeah, I wanted to study science and I wanted to play basketball, and Geneseo was the least expensive opportunity for me to study science and play basketball.
Did you study? Okay, I know you studied science. Did you play basketball?
Also.
Yep. You did. What position?
Yeah,
Center?
No, Matt, I know this is a podcast, you can't see me. I'm a 6'3", 6'4" skinny guy. I was the second shortest kid on the team. Shoot, man.
Oh yeah, no way.
Shooter, baby.
Oh
yeah,
shoot. Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah, I was just, small forward shooting guard.
So then I noticed that in your bio that you got your DVM from Cornell. You went, you practiced for a while in Vermont, and just you like pretty places, Vermont, or why were you in Vermont?
Because I wanted to be in private practice.
Yeah.
And my father told me when I graduated from vet college, he said, son, you're too young and too foolish to work in my practice, and only one of those is certain to change.
Yeah. And so he sent you to Vermont.
Right. Yeah.
And then you went back to Cornell, which is kind of interesting. You didn't stay in practice forever. You must have felt like, hey, there's something different for me in this world. So you went back to Cornell, and
two things happened. Where I was in practice in Vermont, I was having a great time, and I was right on the border of Vermont and New York, and I was having a great time learning all kinds of stuff. But I knew two things. One, I needed quantitative remediation to do what I needed to do, what I thought I needed to do in the dairy industry, bring more analytical and quantitative skills.
Yeah.
So I wanted to get a PhD in epidemiology. And where I was living in the sticks of Vermont, there were not many other opportunities for me to find a significant other.
Right.
And right before I left Cornell as a vet student, I met this Canadian veterinarian who was working at Cornell. So I left Vermont to go back to get this PhD in epidemiology and woo this woman who's now my wife and mother of our two kids.
Oh, fantastic. Oh, fantastic. How old are your kids?
Heidi is 20 and she's playing soccer and studying environmental science at Bates in Maine.
Yeah.
And Peter's going to turn 17 really soon. And he looks like a tall Dutch kid. He's blonde haired, blue eyed, 6'5", 190 pounds. And he's in high school.
Oh, that's fantastic. And so what I enjoyed about your career, and why I always like Daryl was a good friend of mine, is you went through that, you had that clinical part of your world, and I think you were even in kind of extension veterinary medicine for Cornell for a while.
Also true.
And you have the PhD in epidemiology, but then as your career progressed, everybody reads your papers. I mean, you trained Jess McCart. I mean, come on, right? New editor-in-chief at JDS Communications. And, she must have learned something during her program. I mean, she's pretty smart.
Lucky enough to have a bunch of really, really great PhD students, Jessica McCart among them, Sabina Mann, Franco Yell, Amy Vasquez. And mostly what I did, I learned from basketball, I recruit really well, and then let them play.
Yeah, yes.
Right? Get out of the way, let them go. They're top shelf people.
They're fantastic. And they really are wonderful people. And I'm a Cornell guy. Daryl's a Cornell guy. We can be proud of the products of Cornell University, and we can be proud of the fact that small town people like Daryl and I can go to Cornell. And I always tell people that your education is one thing no one can ever take away from you. It's really true. And that's the purpose of your education. No one can take that away from you. And I always felt that about my Cornell education, no one could ever take that away from me, and it's just cool, And so anyways, that's just something. Yeah. So what's fascinating, these hats you wear. Okay. And so goodness gracious, I blew it. Ambulatory and production medicine and quality milk production services sections director of that for the College of Veterinary Medicine. I completely messed that up. Where is the milk quality? What is the name of that?
Yeah. I've done a number of things in my couple decades at Cornell. You know, as you mentioned, I'm a regular old faculty, so I teach vet students and train these great PhD students, right? I still do farm calls, so I, probably cows and just bud calves. But getting promoted out of competence, right? It happens. For about 6 years, I was director of quality milk production services, which is part of the Department of Population Medicine and Diagnostic Sciences. And we have 4 labs, each run by professional staff in the different parts of New York where there's a lot of dairy cows. So we have one in Eastern New York. Currently, Mike Zerkowski's in charge of that in Northern New York, in Canton, where Paul Berkler's in charge. One in Central New York, in Ithaca at Cornell, where Matthias Wieland is currently in charge, and in Western New York, in Warsaw, where a fellow named Rick Waters is currently in charge. And each of those has a technical staff under them, and we provide consulting, teaching, and research, as well as laboratory services to the dairy industry around milk quality.
And that's all with the Cornell brand. So that's
all Cornell.
That's Cornell.
Yep, that's all
Cornell.
Cornell.
That is fantastic. And one of the things that's great about, I think, New York State and the College of Agriculture and the College of Veterinary Medicine at Cornell is you guys have a real Cornell has a real presence across the state, particularly in agriculture, and people know about it.
It's been baked in for well over 100 years. I hope we've developed a symbiotic relationship between the university and the agricultural community.
Yeah, for sure.
Really
It's and so my mother, who knew nothing about my mother was a wonderful person, but she's not an agricultural person, but she knew if she had an agricultural question where she was going to call. How's that sound?
Yeah.
And so now you wear the hat of Cornell. You're the director of the Cornell Atkinson Center for Sustainability. So that's a new thing for you.
Yeah, it's not entirely new now. It's 3 or 4 years into that role as a faculty director of the Cornell Atkinson Center for Sustainability, which is a university-wide center, not only veterinary medicine, not only animal science, but anything having to do with sustainability. For example, my closest colleagues, one is an ecologist, one is an economist, one is an engineer, one is a biogeochemist. In our platform, and we work on a variety of different aspects, catalyzing sustainability research across the university, as well as what makes us kind of unique is we reach out to external partners. We have a whole partnership team where we try to take knowledge to impact outside of academia. And it's been pretty rewarding for me to take my dairy cow chops and put it into this university-wide center, find partners who want to work with us. So those could be any of NGO partners. We have strong collaborations with NGOs like Environmental Defense Fund. We work with private companies like Sam's Club and Cargill to create sustainable agricultural solutions.
I think it's interesting about a university, and that's what's really fun about a university is when you can work with other faculty, maybe a little bit far away from your department or follow and just synergize, and that's one of the great things that can happen in a university. It can be really rewarding. I think part of your career, is doing that.
Yeah, it's excellent. I never would have guessed it would have happened, right? When I was pipetting during a biochemistry major, right?
So what we're going to do now, so we've sort of we have a plan here, Daryl. We're sticking with the plan. It's like a protocol, okay? You know what I mean? We have a protocol. It's a fresh cow protocol. Think of yourself as a fresh cow, okay?
I thought about transition cows and fresh cow protocols.
So we're going through a protocol here with you, and now Kimmy's going to do next part of the. Kimmy's going to handle the next part of the protocol.
Yeah, so we're going to keep the focus on your home state of New York here, Daryl, and talk about, why don't you tell our listeners, some of whom are probably not in the state of New York, may not have a really good understanding of what dairy farming looks like in the state. So why don't you start telling us a little bit more about that? Cool.
I think dairy farming in New York is one of the places that's going to last. And one anecdote of that is Fairlife just decided to build their newest, biggest plant just outside Rochester in Webster. And that company can do their homework. They could have put it anywhere in the world, and they chose to put it in New York. It's going to soak up milk from about 70,000 dairy cows each year. So I believe that they think that's a sustainable place to run their business. it's supported currently by a little over 600,000 lactating dairy cows. And each of those 4 quality milk production services labs is within about an hour drive of about 100,000. So the reach of Cornell into that dairy industry, the tentacles are pretty good. Until recently, New York was behind California and Wisconsin in milk production. So we're a major milk producing state, the leader in cottage cheese, sour cream, and yogurt production across the
You're
country.
really stretching. What did you say? Cottage cheese?
Sour cream and yogurt.
Oh.
And yogurt over the past decade has been pretty much the savior of the dairy industry. It's the largest growth. It has been. It's sort of flattened out in the last couple of years. But part of the story of why Idaho might have gone past New York is because of the Greek yogurt, Chobani, right? So Chobani started in New York and just down the road in South New Berlin, and really took off and created good yogurt for people across North America. You can't go to an airport or a supermarket and not see Greek yogurt now.
Yeah.
And that really led the charge. Then they built a new plant, Chobani did in Idaho, which is soaking up a lot of milk out there and pushed Idaho past New York.
Yeah, well,
Well, it's definitely exciting about the new plant. I know when I talk to producers across the country, one of their biggest frustrations is the bottleneck that comes from a lack of processing. Just too much milk limits their growth. So that's great that New York is alleviating some of that pressure a little bit.
Yeah, and we also have some really innovative other places to put milk. In Cayuga County, which is just north of Cornell, is Cayuga Marketing, which is a group of 25-ish dairy farm families who also built their own plants. So Cayuga Milk Ingredients, they built their own plant so they could integrate the production and the processing and sales of the milk. And they're so good at it that even through these hard times, they didn't even have to implement a base excess program.
Perfect. So speaking of dairy producers, as you're talking to producers across New York, but this could also be across the Northeast or just across the nation as a whole, what topics continue to come up? What's on their minds when they're chatting with you?
We often start with some veterinary things, right? But then we dispense with those often pretty quickly. And a thing that's looming in much of the dairy industry in North America, and particularly in New York, are labor challenges, right? We're working through now some overtime issues, which will present some challenges and some reorganization of labor. But among the really good dairies, we have pretty consistent workforce on the dairies, and it's worked out pretty well, but it's on everyone's mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually did an article about a year ago about egg overtime in New York. I just passed that law that was stepping it down. I believe it's a 10-year stair step right down to 40. So Washington State, where I'm originally from, as we talked about earlier, they had no grace period. When it passed in 2021, it went into effect immediately. And so a lot of producers were struggling. So what are you hearing from producers as they're planning for what this is going to look like on their farm? You mentioned strong workforce and those dairies are really resilient. What are you hearing as far as what are you hearing in terms of how they're planning for these challenges?
As you mentioned, one thing that is really good, and we'll remind them that we did get blessed sort of with a stair step plan. So it wasn't
10 years is a long time, but it's also not a long time.
It's also not a long time.
Yeah.
So, stabilizing the management structures for that right now is really important. And people are also looking at various technological solutions to coincide with labor also, right? So if we can take some people out of the parlor, right? So one dairy I work with at the back end of the rotary, right? It's robot post-dip, right? And we're trying to automate more things, and we're, investigating different ways to stimulate the cows so we can have perhaps less people at the front, automated feed push-up, all kinds of things.
So on the flip side of the dairy equation is the consumer. So some of your research has a little bit more to do with that side of the industry. So what are you hearing from them? What topics are of interest to them or are on their minds these days?
Well, I'm a consumer, right? And sometimes I'm allowed to go to the grocery store and interact with consumers, but sometimes I accost them and they send me out. But they are interested, and it trickles into our conversations at Cornell and out on the farm. Environmental sustainability and animal well-being are two things that we hear about a lot. And on the environmental sustainability side, a bunch of our more progressive dairies, we're working in the energy space also right now. So we want to be centers of human nutrition, so dairy products, as well as energy centers, right? Whether that be running methane through a genset to create electricity, which we don't get paid very well for, or putting cleaned up renewable natural gas into the pipe and taking advantage of the California low carbon fuel standard, or perhaps even compressing it and making some compressed natural gas to run vehicles with. We're looking at all of those things in the New York dairy industry right now.
That's fantastic.
Yep.
And so Daryl, you mentioned sort of environmental stewardship associated with dairies. Also, the dairy welfare is on the minds of the consumers. And my impression of the dairy industry in general is cows, given all the advances we have made, are better cared for today than they've ever been. And I'm assuming, do you have examples of that from your work as a veterinarian at Cornell, where you feel like, you know what, they are better cared for, they are healthier than ever before because of science and understanding?
Yeah, through science, understanding, and implementation of management, I can point to data and share stories where I can believe that cows in our care have never had better care, right? If we look at one measure objectively of health, and I'll say well-being because I think they're inextricably linked, we'll talk about the national somatic cell count, right? So for this, I don't have to explain that to this podcast, right? But as a measure of inflammation in the udder, national somatic cell count has never been lower since it's been recorded and continues to go down every year. We have less and less cows with subclinical mastitis infections. Calf health, right? Mortality, right, has never been lower.
Right.
We can get better at it, but it's never been lower. Reproductive performance, probably never been better. And then little things that the stories I can share from my father on through me, and, stepped on teats. That's gotta be painful. I've never been a cow, so I don't know, but it's not something we deal with very much. My dad would tell me stories that he would spend sometimes hours a day working on stepped on teats, right? Now we've engineered stalls and flooring so the cows don't slip and they don't step on teats when they lie in their stall and get back up, or step on their neighbor's teats. So macro scale health indices, as well as these little things we can see every day in animal well-being, I think we're going in the right direction. We still can do better, but we are absolutely going in the right direction now.
I think one of the things that, and again, I like to keep mentioning Progressive Dairy Podcast, is when I listen to your interviews with producers and dairy people, it comes through so clearly how much these people care about their cows.
Yeah.
There is just no question in your mind. And the things they say and the innovations they're making to ensure that their cows are as well cared for as possible. And we don't want to go back 50 years or 100 years. We don't want to go that direction, because you didn't mention milk fever, but that was another thing completely eliminated in the modern dairy. That's through science.
Yeah, I think partly I got to go to college because my dad ran around treating individual cases of mastitis and treating milk fevers.
Right.
Most veterinarians don't have to do that today. You haven't eliminated those things, right? And there's subclinical conditions we still have to deal with to get better. Right. But that was a huge thing, and now it's not a thing.
So I think that's something I couldn't work for the dairy industry if I wasn't proud of the dairy industry. I couldn't do it. And it's just a great message. And the second thing that's an exciting message about the dairy industry is sort of the drive for carbon neutrality. is that the right word? Carbon neutrality, or is it what are we're trying to be carbon neutral, greenhouse gas neutral by 2030 or 2050? Give me 2050. Okay, we're going 2050.
Right, yeah.
Before Dr. Lucy dies, hopefully,
Right,
maybe.
yeah.
I'm not sure. I mean,
We don't want that.
we
We're
don't
gonna
want
be positive
that.
on this podcast.
Okay, so before I'm 6 feet under, okay,
Yeah.
we're gonna have carbon neutrality. You know what? I think we might be able to do it, but tell me, because I want to learn more about how we're going to do that. And the reason I'm going to ask you about this is I read one of your papers, and because Daryl is the kind of guy who's a prolific publisher, and he publishes science,
Mhm.
and in the American Journal of Veterinary Research on herd turnover rate. And I was really particularly interested in sustainability and methane emissions. And when I saw the title, I said, oh, well, Daryl's going to say we need, 10% replacement rates, because if we have low replacement rates, we have fewer heifers, we're raising fewer heifers. That's going to be better for carbon footprint, have fewer animals on the farm. And then I read the conclusions, and it's like, Daryl, you flipped the script on me. So tell me what you found when you actually analyzed, herd turnover rate and its relationship to sort of greenhouse gas or methane emissions.
Yeah, so we did a little bit of math, and we excellent collaborators, like excellent grad students, right? And Caitlin Briggs deserves a particular call out here, right? As a co-author on this, but the turnover rate, that is having available replacements. And Matt talked to some advancements we've had in the dairy industry, and among them, in the last decade or so, we've gotten really good at making babies. So we can sort of dial in, right, this right number of replacements. And we've got sex semen, and we've got beef crosses, and we're doing better with rearing those young babies, right? Mortality is lower than it's ever been. We get them pregnant on time, and they can freshen at, for example, 85% of mature body weight. So they're ready to lactate. So if we have an available pool of replacements, it's going to allow us to optimize each spot on a dairy to have the most efficient cow in that spot. Because every dairy has a distribution of expressed phenotypes. And the genotype we know about, but the phenotype is an expression of that genotype in the environment. And for whatever happens in the environment, sometimes those genotypes don't respond. And we get this phenotype, which is not the optimal to have in their spot. So if we have enough replacements, good ones, we're going to be able to select each cow and decide which players on the team are going to contribute to our championship the best, right? And with a modestly increased turnover rate, if we fix milk production to meet current demand, we actually can have a few more heifers in the pipe, right? Like in the minor leagues, yet we have fewer but higher producing lactating dairy cows. And if we compare them, both economically and in terms of the enteric methane, which is, a greenhouse gas, methane is a greenhouse gas, we want to have less of it. We're going to have a total decrease in greenhouse gases when we sometimes have a few more heifers, but we have a few less lactating cows, because the metabolic requirements of a lactating cow far surpass those of the heifers, right? So we can have a modest increase in heifers if we have fewer lactating cows. Dry matter intake is the driver of this, okay? And if we dilute the maintenance of those lactating cows, so whatever the dry matter intake is, if we take in 1 kilogram of that, we put out about 0.46 kilograms of methane. And if we decrease that total intake by having less high producing cows, right, we're going to have less total methane, and certainly less methane intensity.
So you would recommend, so basically what you're saying is we shouldn't be fearful of having a high replacement rate and maybe a little higher, a younger herd structure. That shouldn't be, we don't need to avoid that if we want to achieve lower methane emissions from a dairy.
That's true, Matt. What we want to have is enough replacements to be able to make optimal replacement decisions.
Right.
What we really don't want to happen, right, is having an imposed replacement rate.
Right,
Where
right,
someone thought, pick your number, 25% is better than 35%.
right, right,
Certainly we'd have less heifers,
right,
but if those less heifers comes with less efficient lactating cows,
right,
right, we're going in the wrong direction in terms of enteric methane.
right. Yeah, so this was my misconception is I was thinking, well, we'll have a very low replacement rate. You know, we'll only have, you know, we got 1,000 cow dairy, we only have 200 heifers to choose from the year. But really, if you have a really small pool of heifers, first of all, you're probably gonna have to use all those heifers, which you might not want to do, but you're also probably gonna have to keep all those cows, which you might not want to do.
Correct.
Right?
Exactly.
So you need options as a dairyman to get the best players on the team, right?
Correct.
And so if you think about the college football analogy, I mean, you're going to recruit. You're going to bring in the best freshman class you can. And if that freshman class is better than the sophomore, junior, and senior class, guess who's playing? The freshman
it happened
class.
to me.
Oh, come on. So they're going to play the freshman class, right?
Yeah.
So you're playing the freshman class. And there's what you're telling me, there's nothing wrong with playing the freshman class if you got a superior freshman class.
Absolutely right.
Yeah, who would? It's an easy one.
Right.
It's an easy one,
Yeah.
right? It's an easy one. So so I want to kick it back over to Kimmy because we gave Kimmy's going to talk to you about a different paper that you published, another really great paper that was really relevant to the dairy industry. So Kimmy, why don't you dissect that one?
Yeah, before I do that, one thing that stood out to me when I was reading the paper we were just talking about is when you're talking about lag time, as far as like when producers are making those decisions, if they say we're really set on that, use 25% as an example, really trying to keep it at that level, they don't know what's to come in the future, right? And so
3 years.
Exactly. So what are some of the other considerations that producers can think about when they're making those decisions, if they are of the mentality that they want to, even if they want to range, say they want like 25 to 30%, for example, what are some things they need to think about?
You have to look a little bit at the range of replacement because you do have to manage your inventory. You need space for the animals, but you're probably going down the wrong road.
Yeah.
Okay. If you want to manage to a replacement rate, because inevitably you're going to short yourself on having the best freshman class, right? So you want to think about how many heifers do I need to start each week and each month so that I have a sufficient pool, a sufficient pipe to make the optimal decisions. So what you want to think about are all those upstream things, because it takes 3 years, right? We're thinking about what we're going to be replacing in 3 years from now when we breed an animal, right? So you do want to think about, well, I want to get some quick cash flow perhaps from a beef cross, right? Beef on dairy, very lucrative right now. And I'm not going to tell anybody not to do it because I think we can maintain optimal replacement rates with some measure of beef semen, because we can offset some of that with sex semen because we have enough replacements. But you should continuously work always to improve your reproductive performance with the right semen balance, and then do great by those babies. We just take great care of our babies and get them to the right breeding age on time, right? And get them to calve at the right time we're going to aim right now at 85% plus of mature body weights. That's what we should be thinking of as we build this pipe to have the optimal dairy herd lactating.
Perfect answer. I'm glad you elaborated the way you did on that, because I know with a lot of producers, I don't hear a lot of them that are really set on a specific rate, especially for those things that have a longer leg time, like you were talking about with 3 years, but good considerations in case they are thinking along those lines.
Yeah.
So that was good. So the second paper we want to chat with you about today is titled Dairy Production Sustainability Through a One Health Lens. So in the paper, you talk about pathogen-based treatment decisions for mastitis. So I guess we'll start the conversation there. What are some examples of taking a pathogen-based approach to mastitis treatment?
Cool. So this fits in with the other paper because I think the dairy industry and particularly dairy farmers have always been the first conservationists, stewards of the resources that we're working with. So we're going to be stewards of land, we're going to be stewards of cows. We also want to be stewards of antibiotics and stewards of antibiotic use. We want to use not zero and not every animal. So this pathogen-based treatment of clinical mastitis. So when I was a young boy, every cow that got a clinical case of mastitis got tubes, right? So she got treated intramammary with an intramammary antibiotic and sometimes erroneously systemic antibiotics. What we can do now through research, we figured out that the cow's immune system is going to take care of roughly a third of those cases. And when we look at trying to find an organism there, there'll be no organism left because the cow's immune system is already taken care of it. So when we see the inflammation from that infection, the cow has already killed all the bacteria. So there's no point in us putting an antibiotic in there. We've also learned that for certain pathogens, particularly E. coli, which is one of the highest incidence pathogens on most dairies in North America right now, the cow's immune system will eventually take care of it. And adding an antibiotic to that doesn't improve any bioeconomic outcome that we've ever measured. The only thing it does is cost you antibiotic cost, cost you hospital pen time, and potentially creates a residue. So if we can understand if there's no pathogen left at the time we detect mastitis, or if it's within a certain group of mastitis pathogens like E. coli, we can just put that cow in the hospital pen 2 or 3 days until her milk looks normal, and then she can go home, which is on average 3 or 4 days sooner that she would re-enter the milking string than if we added an antibiotic to that. There are still other pathogens, however, where we've found out that using antimicrobial intramammary helps the cow cure that infection better and stops her from having a recurrent infection, and she goes on to make more milk than if she wasn't treated. So finding out that pathogen, it turns out to be an economical solution and a stewardship thing to do.
So how does selective dry cow therapy fit into the discussion?
So it's pathogen-based treatment of clinical mastitis, right? We're just going to select which cows we want to put antibiotics in as opposed to blanket therapy. Selective dry cow therapy, again, we're going to select which cows get to antimicrobial at the end of their lactation. So heretofore, right, it was in the first 5-point plan for mastitis control and then a 10-point plan. Every quarter of every cow gets an antibiotic at dry off. And that was a good idea at the time when the average cow, and this is a case again of improving the dairy industry. Back in the day when this was, introduced in the early 70s, the average cow had an active subclinical infection at dry off. So it didn't pay to sort out which cows. And it really helped us move forward and clean up a lot of these contagious pathogens like strep ag and things. It helped with the eradication of that. Now, 2020 something, we're at a place where the average cow doesn't have a subclinical infection at dry off, and we can sort that out with some various algorithms that we've developed or cow side tests. In fact, it's usually less than 10 or 15% of cows have an infected quarter at dry off. So we want to sort those out. So as opposed to treating 100% of quarters at dry off, now in herds that already have good milk quality, that's a key, right? You got to be on your milk quality game if you're going to give up your, blanket therapy, and it's like a security blanket thing. You got to have your game, get your ducks in order. Now we can treat, only 50 or 40% of the cows with intramammary antibiotics at dry off. And we've had herds that have been doing this for years and years and years now. And their somatic cell count is still reputable and they don't have lots of clinical cases. But as I said, you don't want to do this in every herd because there's some herds who still have other more important milk quality things to solve first.
So you just said that not every herd, this isn't a good fit for every single herd. So expand on that a little bit more and tell us about what types of cows, what types of herds this is most effective for.
So the herds that can do this, typically are gonna have a somatic cell count in their bulk tank less than 250,000, maybe less than 200,000, right? So that's a general measure of the amount of subclinical infection they have. So they've got to have that in order, right? No strep ag, right? Because strep ag is very curable with the antibiotics we have, the FDA approved intermammary antimicrobials. Very effective to kill that, and it's very contagious. So it's a really good way to clean up the herd. So low cell count, no strep ag, minimal Staph aureus that's not growing, right? Not increasing in spread, another contagious pathogen. And you've got to have a herd which is good at implementing new management things, right? So if they're going from blanket therapy, where we do the same thing to every cow, to standard operating procedure where we do different things to some cows, right? Where we just use a teat sealant on cows, which are low risk for having a intermammary infection. And the cows that are high risk for having intermammary infection get a teat sealant and an antimicrobial, right? That takes a step up in management because we're not doing the same thing to every cow. So you got to have good management chops to do this.
So the overall theme of the paper was sustainability, of course, and you focus mostly on topics of or areas of sustainability as they relate to the United States. But of course, we know it's not a localized issue. Sustainability is global. So what do those conversations look like on a global level?
Yeah, wearing my Cornell Atkinson Center hat, I get involved in a bunch of those discussions. And if we're talking about climate change, right? We have to keep our own house in order first, and we're going to make the best dairy industry we can in the United States and North America. But the whole planet's going to warm. So we've got to help people and put a good view on animal agriculture across the world as well. And if we're just talking about greenhouse gas intensity, we've made great strides in decreasing the intensity. So you can say methane per quanta of fat and protein corrected milk. And a lot of that has to do with these innovations and increases in management we've had through time. High production leads to low intensity. There's some other places where we have in the world where we have to help them with basic infrastructure in animal agriculture so they can dilute these maintenance costs across perhaps fewer productive units so that they can decrease their intensity as well. Basic things, right? We've got to get better genetics out there. We've got to have better disease control, better reproductive efficiency, and certainly better nutrition. Right? All, basic stuff done at a better level. Things that we've been working on every day in the U.S. dairy industry. So
what are some of the most important points that you'd want somebody who is reading your paper to walk away with?
In that second paper you're talking about there, Kimmy, I think it came up here this afternoon and during this Discover conference, I think is optimism. We have a pretty nice set of facts to build a story around that dairy creates high quality nutrition for humans. And we can do so in a way where the animals have good well-being, and in the trade-off, it's okay for the planet as well. And we're continually making improvements in that.
I think the dairy story is a great one. And you're a great representative of that, Daryl. I mean, just the things you've done over your years in your career. And I thought this antibiotic stewardship thing is important because I know you've taken some hits, and I've read not Progressive Dairy, but I've read a few articles in some other dairy magazines where they're very critical of your approach here of that. And yet, you've been a stand-up guy, and you've based your recommendations on science, and I think that's been really, really great. And a couple of just sort of side notes I'd just like to interject for some of our listeners is that even though we're talking about antibiotics and treating cows with antibiotics, the milk antibiotics don't enter the milk stream in America. As you pointed out in your paper, it's almost impossible. Number one, dairymen test the milk before it would ever go back into the tank for human consumption. The co-ops test the milk
of milk leaving a dairy gets tested for beta-lactam antibiotics.
Mhm.
Every load.
And also, again, before it's accepted at the processing plant, because there's so many safeguards at every level.
And so it's just, we hear we don't want any hormones in milk. We don't want this in milk. Okay, we got you covered. Okay, we got you covered.
Yeah, if you're worried about antibiotics in your dairy products, you can comfortably worry about something else.
Yes, something else. And the other thing, this is maybe a little more sciencey, a little more geeky, but this is something I get beat up on quite a lot is antibiotic resistance on dairies, which we know exists. There's no denying. There's also antibiotic resistance in human hospitals. And my takeaway from all the reading is there's antibiotic resistance on dairies, there's antibiotic resistance on hospitals, but don't blame the dairy industry for the antibiotic resistance in hospitals, in American hospitals. I don't think those bugs are going between dairies and the hospitals. Is that your read of the situation or not? Or you just haven't studied it?
It's a long and winding road from resistant pathogens over here, and it could be on a dairy, to resistant pathogens over here, including in hospitals or geriatric care centers or whatever else. Theoretically, that pathway exists. It's really hard to show it. And if we look at the list of pathogens and diseases, which are most critically important to humans, they're not zoonotic pathogens. Right. So
it's kind of a misconception that's out there. And this is one thing that the science has really been working on. When you actually do the genomic, when you do DNA sequencing of these organisms and on-farm organisms, you're like, hey, this road doesn't, there's no highway between these two things,
That's probably right, but it's not a highway. There might be some, road through the hills.
Right, but it's not Interstate 81.
Right.
Or the thruway, the New York State thruway. Okay, just to give you New York State or something you can grab onto. And so but the dairy industry is very serious about antibiotic stewardship. There's absolutely no question about it, and that's the one thing I love about, again, I'm a big fan of the dairy industry, but I don't think we've ever been an industry to say, if there's a concern among consumers, if there's a concern among whoever, we're not, oh, don't worry about that. You don't need to worry about that. You consumer person, we got this covered, you just go back to whatever, and no. If there's credibility in the argument, if there's real meaning there, we're going to address it and fix it. We're not going to try to hide it and pretend it doesn't exist. It just isn't our industry.
Yeah,
it's never been our industry.
Farmers are the first conservationists.
It's true, right? It's true. So Daryl, you've been a fantastic guest. Now we have to ask you a few questions, okay? And I'm going to.
They're really tough.
These are really tough, okay? And then I'm going to ask you a question. Kimmy's going to ask you a question, and then we're going to go through. We got a couple of questions, and by the time we get done with the questions, we're gonna wrap it up. Okay, so you're almost done. Okay?
All right.
And is he doing okay, Kimmy?
Great.
He's doing great.
Very relaxed,
Yeah. Do we need to infuse some, I don't know, saline or something or whatever?
I think earlier about potentially needing more coffee, but I think
he's okay. So he's hanging in there. So so question number one. There's no right or wrong answer here, okay? So anyways, any real good science career or veterinary career advice that you can give or you got along the way? Science advice or veterinary career advice from somebody that you got that was like, wow, that was helpful.
Yeah, career advice, particularly for young people who want to set out on a science career, get really good at reading, writing, and arithmetic. Yeah. I'm serious. The basic stuff, particularly with technological advancements that are coming, the basic things about being able to understand information, synthesize it, think about it logically, and communicate it are still the foundation of doing good science. And don't be afraid to be really observant and question things.
Yeah, it's an excellent point, right? It's that basic knowledge that you get, and I'm a New York Stater, and I often think back to my high school days in New York State because I had some influential high school teachers, and then at Cornell, of course. But that stuff matters.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You need that. You need those building blocks, to be successful.
Yeah, and that leads perfectly into our next question. So speaking of influential people, we all have those folks in our personal and professional lives. So was there anybody or this could be one person, it could be multiple people. Did anyone inspire your career in terms of what you decided to study or the directions that you've taken your career in over the last few decades?
Yeah, the real Dr. Nydam, my dad,
Mhm.
Chuck
You
Nydam.
talked about him earlier. Yeah,
100%.
fantastic.
He must, is he still alive?
Yeah.
And he must,
Yeah,
he might
he's
listen to your
83 years old
podcast.
and
Would
he's
he like
still
to come
with my
on?
butt.
He's still with your, I was gonna say, is he gonna listen to your podcast? Are you gonna make him listen to Dairy Digressions and Progressive Dairy? Yeah.
He still keeps up. My mom still yells at him about the stack of magazines that are around the house, including Progressive Dairy.
Oh, yeah. So it's fantastic. And so, if you were not a scientist, what would you be doing? Or a veterinarian? You can't say I would be a veterinarian. No. Okay.
Yeah,
You take it all up
completely
to
different.
Scientist, I would
Yeah.
say. Yeah. Well, I remember I went to undergrad to study science and play basketball. And I followed up on the science because being paid to be a professional athlete wasn't in the cards for me. I'm pretty good. I can still shoot, but I might still like to help young people and make examples, learn lives, and teaching examples through coaching. I've been lucky enough to be a travel team youth soccer coach, as well as an AAU basketball coach. I'm assistant varsity basketball coach. That's been pretty rewarding for me also. And it overlaps with a lot of the things that I get to do interacting, with farmers and students and stuff. It's a teaching aspect of it.
I had I did not know you're seriously doing some coaching. You coach at the high school in Ithaca?
Yeah, I'm the assistant varsity coach, which means the real head coach does all the paperwork and I get to do basketball.
Oh, that's fantastic.
You get the fun job.
You get the fun job. Yeah.
He probably won't watch his podcast.
Yeah.
Okay,
No,
right,
don't-
You just
He's
won't
a
tell
great
him
guy.
about the
Yeah.
podcast.
No,
Yeah.
it's another lucky situation that I've been in, and it's been pretty lucky too that I've got to coach my daughter all through her soccer, and she's a really good player now, and working with my son as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, Kimmy.
So throughout this episode today, you talked about some of the automation, some of the new automation that you're seeing on dairies. You've talked about coaching and a lot of those things. So what excites you most regarding the future of the dairy industry?
We touched on it a little before. I think what's exciting about it is that we have an opportunity to continue to make high quality human nutrients. I know I just said this, right? In a way that's good for planetary health and good for the animals. The nutritional matrix of dairy foods is really unparalleled. There's a mounting bunch of literature out there which shows, in addition to providing vitamins and minerals and protein, the whole matrix is protective against some of the most chronic diseases in humanity. I think this is a really great place to be, and I get to work outside still, right? Working with farmers outside is a pretty neat place.
And you can't pick better people than farmers to be around any day.
Let's see. This has been a fantastic podcast.
Absolutely.
I think absolutely. And first of all, I will thank Kimmy Delaney from Progressive Dairy to accepting our invitation and participating with us today. And it's been a tremendous pleasure. And I would also like to thank Dr. Daryl Nydam from Cornell for participating with us today. And I think that you're a very humble person, okay? But I think what you've talked about today is so meaningful, and I think you really have contributed to the conversation in a major way. So I would like to say thank you to both of you. This has been Dairy Digressions podcast from Itasca, Illinois, wherever we are. And thank you again.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, you're awesome.